Okay.
Welcome back to SideQuest VIII, episode 18. Back with me, my perennial companion and constant side quest companion, Wes Chance. How are you doing, Wes?
Doing good. How
I'm doing great, and hopefully the viewers note that I managed to keep myself from wiggling in my chair during the introduction this time, and that the internet, let's hope, is a little bit smoother than usual. So if people have really been liking our retro feel and liking the mini scratches on the record, as it were, hopefully there are fewer scratches and they're more artisanal now. Because my internet should be smoother, and I'm hoping that holds true during this session today. Well, Wes, so today is our first session after you have finished your teaching load for the year. So that's wonderful it's wonderful to see you free again, as it were. But also the first day that we are talking about Disc 3 and having finished Disc 2. Um, and so I'm looking forward to hearing how you concluded Disc 2. I think it's a little bit different from how I concluded Disc 2 because I had to play a little bit of catch up. But in the spirit of what you suggested that we do, once we got to summer, as it were, pick up the pace and see where we can get as quickly as we can get there. And so this side quest is picking up steam, this doom train, as it were. But what did you play through this time? How did you like it? And how did you like the end of Disc 2, Mr. Chance?
I I was up at Trabia briefly. I think that's where we left off last time we talked. I think yeah, because we did all um the revelations on the basketball court.
Yes.
And so I stuck around there long enough to just talk to more people. And there's one of the people there who Selfie, I guess, hangs out at the coffee shop with in the old days or something, has Selfie's card. So I had to win that. And it's annoying because they play random rules up in Trabia. And so it takes some doing. But eventually I got that card, moved on to the next plot point, right, which is down. It makes sense. We need to go see what's become of the lighthouse and the old orphanage. And you can't actually go in because when you get close, it's like, oh, I feel like there's something huge nearby because, of course, the other Galbadia garden, which we last saw hanging out by Balam Town, is above the forest there. And so that's the famous like FMV sequence with the garden battle, all that. And then beyond that, it's just the end of the disc, right? So facing Seifer and Edea one more time and taking them down. Yeah, that's all I did.
Well, that's really cool. I finally had to catch up with you a little bit, and also about a little bit by accident because that's kind of how I play. I finally found the Shumi village while trying to look for the lighthouse, and I then did what you did. I spent a lot of time drawing and spending money drawing Ultima whenever I could. And then I junctioned that Squall's strength, but also having the new GF Cerberus, who with his three heads fittingly can cast the triple magic, and then when you summon him, he casts triple and double on you, so you have the option. And I had to use a few triple Ultimas on Edea just to make sure that I got through with her. One thing I'll say, besides playing that, I didn't go all the way through the side quest, but I did manage to stock up on something like 38 Ultimas. I'm going to be stocking up again
Mm.
soon. Is that the random rule has taken over at Balam. So when I want to play
No.
Edea and the card club and Sid, so Sid can give me the Seifer card, Edea can give me
Mhm.
the Edea card, as well as a number of other cards. She's quite the player. Even during random, she just randomly got a bunch of good cards, and I got a couple of my good cards and was going to lose Quistis to her, but I can't basically play cards with anybody right now because yes, random has taken over even the home base. I will say that I feel some measure of accomplishment making it to this 3 because we basically had to beat 4 bosses. Cerberus, who himself was pretty tough, and then Seifer, who was tougher than last time but still not very tough, and then Seifer and Edea. And I know from the walkthroughs that if one is properly ready for them, they're fairly easy, but I was not entirely ready for all of them. Like Cerberus, who you have to cast a spell on whenever he casts triple on himself, so which will make him basically or will make you 2 vulnerable to him with 3 abilities to cast magic all in a row. Um, he was tough for me, and I was glad to get through him, but I didn't have many dispels. I didn't have like 99 dispels, so I realized that I need to do a lot more drawing of magic, and I spent a lot of time getting all the Fyras, the Thundaras, and the Blizzaras. My characters just got strong enough to be able to draw that from normal soldiers in battle.
Okay.
These soldiers were very interesting because they had 3 AP, so you could really in this section boost up your GFs. And in fact, my brothers now have HP plus 80%, which I have on Selfie alongside HP plus 40% and HP plus 20%. And so all of a sudden, some of my characters are starting to look a little tanky based on the various things that can be done to them, right? Like, so you could, if you were strong enough, you could get a bunch of Quake from Cerberus.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is the second strongest magic in the game to Ultima, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't very strong for me, but my character's magic stats aren't very strong now. And then I also junctioned Ultima to my strength, and Squall strength went from like 50 to 100.
Yeah.
These stats can go up to 255 though. So I was just thinking, what can I break most efficiently with him? Will his strength help most? And kind of when he gets to a certain level, and it's very helpful if Renzo Coop, if his limit break pops up, because then I can get like 8 or 9,000 damage, and I'm only like my team's average level is like 25 right now, so I'd say we're basically as leveled as we're supposed to be. I think level 32 or so is about the top cap that the strategy guide suggests, and that's how strong Edea and Seifer could have been. That's their top level at this point in the game. And I don't think I was quite there. And I would have been able to draw different magic from them, for example, if I had been. But I wanted to say that I finally started doing some of what I think you've been doing all along, which is really paying attention. I've been paying attention to my GFs, and that's helped. But I hadn't been paying as much attention to try to draw lots of very strong magic in order to shoot up certain stats of mine, like having a huge HP. Like now Selfie went from like a 1600 HP to like a 3500 HP, and we're still in a point of the game where that's really going to help her. She's going to be quite the tank. I also have Shell and Protect on her like special defense. And so she can take a lot of hits, or whoever takes her magic and GFs will be able to take a lot of hits, because again, that's your characters are like less differentiated than the skill sets that you move between them in this game. But yeah, so I wanted to mention that in my meandering, leisurely way, I have found my way to a side quest, and this side quest has, like so many of our conversations, that kind of fight between existentialism and nihilism. Is there meaning? Is there not meaning? Is meaning created or is it found? These are the crux of our questions. It was very worth my time, because had I not had all of these Ultimas, I would not have had the strength necessary to really blow through enemies, and I wouldn't have had the magic necessary to cast with triple cast on me to really do some damage to Edea and get through that fight on the first time and pretty easily. And so I got to feel the pleasure of like kind of blowing through in the same way that I think you've been feeling playing cards almost the entire time. The cards are devastating for me because I lose and I don't know what A means. and so that messes me up with the certain advantages. Um, but so I wanted to say that even this time around, even getting back to business, as it were, knowing that we needed to finish Disc 3, I accidentally went on a side quest that I think incidentally made Disc 3 easier to attain.
Yeah. I, I mean, I think this part of the game is moving pretty fast. And so if you don't start side questing now, you might not get around to it. But did you draw your namesake from Edea before defeating her? The
I did
Alexander
manage to
GF?
draw
Yeah.
Alexander, even though my designated drawer she cast silence on, and I had changed one of her commands from item to magic so that
Oh,
nobody could unsilence her. So she was, so my selfie was silenced for like half of the battle, couldn't cast GFs
yeah.
or draw or do magic, and she's not very strong. So she was just doing little attacks and trying to draw some of Edea's fire. But yes, I did download Alexander the Holy Machine. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to junctioning him to my already quickly dominant, my cast of characters who are becoming more and more powerful. I guess one thing I should say is that we did learn some more, I think, bombshells here. We had to fight Edea. We had to fight Seifer in earnest. Seifer was called worthless, and he said that he couldn't disgrace himself, and he called us monsters. You can see how this dialogue is a holdover from Final Fantasy VII, right? He tries to mess with Quistis's mind. He's like, "Aren't I your favorite student?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's in the past." And he tries to mess with Squall, but it's like Seifer is not a psychological character. He is not a psychological manipulator like Sephiroth. Sephiroth is brilliant and like Moriarty, in that he's a step ahead in terms of his thinking and his planning and his acting. When he messes with Cloud's head, that's a better man messing with a man who wanted to be that better man and could not take the same sort of treatment in order to become like him at the biochemical level. Genova cells overwhelmed um, Cloud's DNA, and as the Ultimecia tells us for Final Fantasy VII, Sephiroth's will overwhelmed Genova's cells, and I think basically he's the only being to have ever achieved that, and so he is special at a deeply psychological, wherever intelligence meets will, he's just the top creature in existence in his world and out of his world for that matter, because Genova is an extraterrestrial. It's like harnessing an
Yeah.
angel. But so when Seifer tries the same sort of thing, it's not, especially if somebody's played Final Fantasy VII, they're like, no, no, no. This whole scene reminded me of the fact that these characters were like Edea was original to Final Fantasy VII, but then had to be
Mhm.
moved out of it. And so this all just shows to me like sort of a carryover, the interaction prior to the battle, and 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 then so the battle happens. You think it's the last battle of the game. Sephiroth has said this is going to be, or sorry, Sephiroth, excuse me, Squall has said this is going to be the final battle. We're going to finally settle things. And then
Mhm.
at the end of it, Rinoa, who showed up right before it for no reason, eh, is like sort of out cold, but she weirdly gets up. Oh, and this is what reminded me of Final Fantasy VII, that these characters experience this sort of, they can't move their bodies, right? And that's the
Mhm.
power of
Mhm.
Sephiroth at the very end of Final Fantasy VII. Like he just suspends everybody. Um, and so, but you see Rinoa get up and go over to Seifer, and uh, the end of disc two is pretty heavy on romance. Rinoa almost dies. Squall has to go save her. He's actually forced to go save her by all of his friends, even though he's in a leadership position and is trying to take that seriously. She takes his ring. Even he thinks to himself about how it's obvious, even to him, that they're working on her. And then this is one of those things that Final Fantasy VIII does that I think is so masterful. instead of this being sort of culminated, it's denied. We're going to have a hiatus here. She's out cold.
Mm.
Something bad has happened to her that is somehow connected with Edea, and now we have heard about this twisted and hateful Ultimecia and this greedy Adel, and that Ultimecia wants to take over Adel. And I have some questions about this weird timeline because Edea got her powers when she was 5, but I guess Adel was still alive then, and then didn't pass her power. So there could be multiple sorceresses alive at once, apparently, because of Edea and Adel, because Adel is not dead.
Right.
And that's our going hypothesis. We don't know where she is. We're gonna have to take a visit to Estar and find out. But now we know that Edea was possessed the entire time that we saw her by Ultimecia. Ultimecia wants Elone because of her time sending back power. And if she can't use Edea, well, then she'll try and use this Adel, who must be alive, who was herself a bit of a nightmare. And I actually know some of the background on this, but I don't want to give too much away. But she is the sorceress of the Sorceress Wars.
Okay.
There were not a bunch of sorceresses. She was the only sorceress. And so they're called the Sorceress Wars because of her presence in one army that was against the Galbadian army. So it was the Estar army versus the Galbadian army, and that's the Sorceress War. And that's the war that Laguna is fighting, by the way, when we take him over. And we're going to take him over again soon here and have a very annoying fight with a ruby dragon, I believe. So we learned these interesting things about these new sorceresses. Rinoa is out cold. I should also ask how you did in your fight against that mech operator, where you have to kick and block, and he gets a pretty unfair advantage getting to knock you against the wall and knocking some of your HP off. But right, so revelations and also that little melee. What did you think about that, especially in the wake of Trabia? It sounds like, yeah, you're suggesting things are moving pretty fast. We're having to take in a lot very quickly, I think.
Yeah. I mean, so once you come out of Trabia, it feels like it's going to be something relatively slow because it's going to involve unpacking what was just revealed, right? This big thing about them all knowing each other from way back and having lost their memories. And so I was expecting, now I'm going to have some exploration of that place. I'm going to look around. I'm going to maybe see some more memories as they start to come back or something like that, right? Because when you try to go there before, it says something like, this place seems familiar, but it won't let you in.
Yes.
And then this time when you go back, you still aren't allowed in because now in your little, monologue, it's like, I feel like there's something huge right behind me. And so you can't go in because you have to do the whole Galbadia versus Balam Garden sequence instead. And so you're sort of locked into a path in exactly the sort of way that Squall hates to feel like, right? The player is locked into this battle and you can't do any exploration. You're just reacting, you're just responding. You can choose from this huge list of options what you want to say in your speech, right? But you're kind of cautioned against saying too many things. And some of them are obviously just silly, like who's going to protect the hot dogs, like that's part of your pep talk is. But you can't say like, let's take care of the younger students, let's organize offense or defense. You can talk about Squall's own feelings, various things. And so you can give a longer or shorter speech. I don't know if it affects your seed ranking at this point or not. But at any rate, there is like some element of choice here, but really it's just like a series of railroaded sequences to, even to the point of having kind of this choreographed, this fight with the mech pilot choreographed above an FMV sequence behind you of the battle, the melee happening. Now, and also interspersed with this, right, is the loss of Rinoa, right? She practically falls off when the gardens collide, and she's hanging there, and Zelga's looking for some rope. And of course, Squall has to be the one to save her, because of course, and it's through wrestling the mech away from the Galbadian paratrooper, right? And kind of swirling around the whole scene of the battle, and then you swoop down and she grabs onto the little holster strap thing. Now then, there's also this business of the ring, right? So Zell borrows your ring. You don't really have an option about that. Um, but then you do get to name the ring later if you choose. So it's almost like another character, like her dog, or like one of the guardian forces, right? These are the things you get to name within the game besides Squall himself. Um, and so there's something going on there about like just talking about who Squall is in terms of this ring that's like symbolic of him, right? The lion, it's his name, right? Lionheart. And then there's this idea that she wants to get to know him better. Um, and it's in this very strange, quiet moment while this huge battle is going on around them. So I guess if you want to think about it, it's like kind of again posing this question of how are the characters' relationships supposed to survive, or in this case, sort of blossom, given the scenario that they're submerged in, right? Of this ongoing war that we don't really know what it's about, this whole thing with the sorceress. Um, and that's really highlighted by the way that the GFs that they use to fight are taking away their memories of one another, right? So there's this kind of like impossibility of connecting with other people so long as you're a mercenary, a seed, and fighting this larger battle. Um, but she's doing her best here. Like she doesn't lose patience with him. It seems like no matter what's going on, in terms of the dialogue that you choose there. Um, there's also yeah, some interesting kind of interactions with the other characters on Garden, right? So this is that big moment for Squall as a leader to like give people the pep talk at the start and organize the defenses and everything. And then you're sort of running around to the different parts and helping out where needed. Of course, saving Rinoa, but also like interacting with the younger students, right? They're very scared. They're sort of um, in the back of the classroom, and there's like a different view that's suddenly put on that whole space, um, where at times the camera will take over and you'll see like the paratroopers, jumping down along the outside wall and then breaking through the. So it's just like a really weird, um, yeah, combination of what we've seen so far in this game of the idea of the pedagogical, right, the teaching and the teaching to be a great soldier or the perfect soldier even, right? Um, but then in this case, it's now this space of trying to secure something, of trying to preserve something, of trying to raise the next generation of kids in this case, or provide some possibility of a romantic relationship between these two characters. So it's just a weird, you know, series of catastrophes, right? It seems like they're going to lose. It seems like they're overwhelmed. They have these like jumping rocket motorcycles for goodness sake, and they have the mechs. Like they're totally outgunned. But of course, our team has the GFs, right? Um, we have that sort of forbidden power that no one else seems to use, much as we draw them from other people. Like no one else summons GFs as far as we know. And yeah, it's really no contest. Like if you have been playing cards, if you have been drawing magic, or finding it or whatever, there's nothing in this that's that difficult. I mean, I did get killed by Cerberus to be clear, like, but again, because I went in with really low HP, and he got triple on himself and then cast Thundaga 3 times or something like that. Like I was toast. So, but the most difficult part is honestly playing random rules in cards. Like
Yeah.
that's made me reset the game so many times,
Mm.
like trying to get Selfie's card and then Edea's card after all this stuff. Yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to jump in on that romance theme because that's something that I focused on in this most recent paper that I wrote based on the presentation
Mm,
that I gave at the conference we were at. But one thing I really like is that Skull sort of seems like a little boy here. He says it's not a monster, it's a lion. And she's like, "Does it have a name?" He's like, "Of course. His name is Griever, of
Reaver.
all
Yeah,
things."
yeah.
And he's like, "Lions represent strength and what is it? There were two attributes. Like it was like not
Pride, right?
yes, pride and strength. There we are. I was like not strength and power, but yes, pride and strength. And so she sees that he's got this ring that if it were anybody but Squall, this would be like a nerdy ring to have.
Yeah.
Um, it'd be more like a cosplay thing than something that a real person wore, for example, and would be perceived probably like that by if any other 17-year-old boy were to wear it. But for Squall, he's so cool that if he wants to have a lion ring named Griever that represents pride and strength, then people are going to take it seriously. Now, something
Yeah.
you mentioned about the Rinoa thing sort of itself being sort of a side quest, placing itself, not juxtaposing, interposing even itself on the main action of the plot. Well,
Mhm.
the first request for the ring is also that too. Squall is or Zell is leading formation and at this moment, and he just calls Squall over to the side to ask him for the ring. It's a very weird interaction and misplaced interaction. It's not the time, Zell. Especially before Squall goes into battle, you want to take his ring from him. That itself is sort of odd. I would want Squall to be focused as a young new leader who has a huge responsibility ahead of him. And as it turns out, Seifer's looking pretty good. Seifer looks
Yeah.
really effing cool when he leads the charge and he throws out his sword. And then, like you said, these hardened Galbadian soldiers with their almost Mundus 3 eyes, but actually it's 4-eyed goggles that themselves look somewhat like the Shinra outfits from Final Fantasy VII. Are they're shooting? They're like rocket propelled uh, motorcycles that then can ride on the hull of Balam Garden. Wow. And then there are the guys in the mechs. So he's leading real soldiers. So he's looking a little bit like less like a fake and a dud. And Squall is looking a little bit more like that with his 17-year-old self and kind of cowardly headmaster behind him and this motley crew of individuals below him. Some seeds, yes, of course, and of course the GFs, like you said, but all these other more average students are well, we see them like lighting people on fire and fighting with their swords and the FNVs, but they are not the same hardened battle force that Seifer has access to. And so this I think is one of those interactions where it's like, well, if we have so much trouble with Seifer, how are we supposed to save the world at some point? How are we supposed to fight against this
So,
Ultimecia? Yeah.
so yeah, I guess the purpose here of Cypher fighting is that just as Edea is controlled by Ultimecia, he's controlled by her through Edea, right? So he's he's enacting like some sort of fantasy of his own. Um, but I don't know that that entirely explains what's going on at the end of the disc where Rinoa gets up and goes to him, right? So I mean, is that a kind of um like sympathy that she's feeling for him still? Obviously it's very unsettling for Squall now that he has started to feel, certain things about her finally. Or is that some kind of transference of the control of this other sorceress figure from the future, um, that's now reaching out, as we've seen before, like Renoa is of some interest to Edea slash Ultimecia, and then she goes into this coma. So we really don't know what's going on with her. Um, but that was the first indication, I guess, we've seen in a while of anyone else besides Fujin and Raijin caring about Cypher. Even they, when you see them in like stairwell, they're like, we're gonna leave Seifer up to you. Like we're not gonna fight on his side anymore. Um, so yeah, he's far from a Sephiroth figure. He's much more a figure of pity almost, right? Of yeah, just feeling bad for him.
He would I think the Jungians would suggest that, like with Edea, he's overwhelmed by the archetype.
Uh-huh.
And he's lost his individuation or his capacity for individuation at the moment. He can't embody the archetype in his own way. His mind is overcome by the weight or the idea of being a hero, being the sorceress's knight. He wants to lean into that abstract title rather than to sort of embody it in his own way and be himself. But because he's overwhelmed by it, in the same way that Edea, even though she is literally overwhelmed by Ultimecia's consciousness, um, is is overwhelmed by the sorceress archetype, and
Yeah.
so they occupy these sort of stock antagonist figures of sorceress and knight, and they themselves are not connected to each other because she feels nothing for him and calls him a worthless fool when he
Mhm.
falls. And he just comes back to lick at her boots. And I think that's what Fujin and Rajan are reacting to. This is not Seifer anymore. If this were Kingdom
Yeah.
Hearts, he would have become a Heartless by now or had a black hood on or something like that. There would be a physical indication that or a costume indication that he had changed in some way. And so I'm interested to see that because, of course, he's so juxtaposed to Squall. Squall, who's actually become what he is now. Now, this great leader who's exploring his own depths and a relationship. Seifer is going to have to sort of like come back from the crazy house, as it were. I mean, a very vulgar way of putting it, but he's going to have to come back to consciousness, come back to the shore from being overwhelmed by an archetype. And whether he can
Mhm.
do that and regain himself, regain his two best friends, and anything more than that, that's going to be, I think, his character arc. In the same way that somebody who's like a drug addict, it's like, yeah, you can achieve great things, but probably the most important thing is to get away from that addiction or to overcome that addiction or to put that addiction in the past in some way. And so it's sad also where you see Squall sort of attaining all of his dreams,
Yeah.
and while Seifer is living more and more in the land of dreams. And so the last thing I just wanted to mention, because this was the point that I meant to make a point ago, is that something about the romance is I think that you notice that it creates something like a dual consciousness in Squall, and this is what he didn't want. That while he's
Mhm.
trying to be a great leader, he also has to think about Rinoa. While he's trying to think about the lives of all these people, he actually really cares about the life of this one person who is in mortal danger. And then when he's just trying to fight against Edea, there's already a very loaded situation, but luckily he doesn't have his memories. She shows up, and this complicates the situation again. And then afterwards, already a complicated situation, having dealt with Seifer and Edea. Oh no, it's not all over. And then what is she doing? Going over to Seifer? Yes,
Yeah.
it could just be concern. It could also be a desire to console, but it could also be a relief at the fact that he's alive, because the last time she had seen him, everybody thought he was dead until we saw him again. And so there may be some holdover emotion there. And then, of course, there's what Squall may be nervous of, the idea that she still may feel something romantically for him, especially now that Squall sort of opened up to her, and we see him thinking about her while he is finding out essential information to his quest at Edea/Matron's home. They're talking to him and he's listening, but he's thinking about Rinoa at the same time. And so I want to suggest that this is, again, something interesting and good and complicated the game does. It complicates its own main narrative by having its protagonist start to sort of relativize the importance of this ultimate quest, which does seem to have ultimate meaning because it's saving all life and time on Earth, uh, and keeping it from a hellish like sort of Mobius strip infinite loop. Um,
Yeah.
but he's just thinking about it Rinoa a bunch. But that's very real. That's very realistic and especially real to his time. But I think also what I mean when I say realistic is this is how a mature person lives. You do have people that you have a personal concern for that you're thinking about all the time, even though you're doing your job or your career or your vocation. We're not Jedi, we're not priests or monks who I think work very hard to try and sort of limit that sort of thing so they can focus on their sort of holy duty and their vocation. But with us, we have to do the vocation, but then you've got these little humans running around that you love and you think about them, and you've got a wife too. I've got little dogs and also a wife. But the thing is, one's vocation or even within the scope of a game that gives the characters a telos, romance gets in the way of that in some not necessarily as an obstacle, but it certainly diverts one's focus. And I think part of what growing up is and becoming mature is not limiting those sources of joy or of romance or of care or of love, because romance might just be a part of life, or a certain time of life. But those diversions might become children, for example, and that one way of living is to sort of deny that, the monastic sort of ideal, and be like, well, just don't have any junk food in the refrigerator, and you won't eat any junk food, and that is one way to limit the presence of such a thing in one's life. But I think the very ethical way is to try and to have sort of moderation where one can manage relationships in the world while also managing one's vocation. And that is what Squall had the one strategy, but it didn't work given his position in the world. And so now he has to adopt the second. And it's tough and tricky when one cares about people, especially when they get hurt, and show that they might like your ultimate rival still.
I'm just seeing something here that I think goes along with that idea, right? So the name Ultimecia, as it's written in Japanese kanji, could alternatively be like rendered something close to the name Artemisia,
Uh-huh.
Artemisia. And so you've got like a pun on Ultimecia Artemis, Artemis, the goddess of the moon, the hunt, and the virgin goddess, right? The maiden huntress. And so this idea like of, yeah, not being responsible for anyone else, not having to take care of anyone else, just being able to sort of be single-minded about a single vocation, right? And so I think that is a kind of interesting, uh, like the fact that that name is suddenly dropped in here as we're um, dealing with. So we had to fight this person who was the matron, but is now clearly possessed by something, right? Um, doesn't seem to be the same person anymore. Um, and and yeah, now Squall again has this kind of problem of he's the leader, he still has to see this mission through. On the other hand, Rinoa is in some sort of coma, he's torn, he has to care for her. And of course, Seifer has disappeared again. So there's also yet that other thing, that sort of rival um, persona of his that he's got to track down and address. Um, yeah. Well, on the plus side, Sid has turned up, right? Sid and Edea are both hanging out on the beach there, and wherever he was hiding, maybe it was here this whole time. He has managed to come out with neither his wife being killed nor having to, directly be the one to fight her. So good for Sid. Well played. Um, yeah.
So I just wanted to say to your point on Ultimecia and Artemisia and Arutamicia, I guess is how the kanji is pronounced. Page 84 of Remy
Yeah.
Lopez is the legend of Final Fantasy VIII. He has a pretty good exposition on this that I thought might might offer one last facet to your analysis, which I thought was great. But this Japanese is, in fact, quite similar to both Ultimecia and Artemisia, the latter being the Latin form of the Greek name Artemisia, referring to Artemisia II, sister and wife of satrap and Greek ruler Mausolus of Mausoleum fame, who lived in the first half of the 4th century BC. Incidentally, the word mausoleum, it's funny how he does get to it, is derived from the name of this ruler and the tomb that was erected in his memory. So you're starting to see the idea of a mausoleum where dead things are kept, time compression. In any case, the story after the death of her brother husband, Artemisia, or no, I think it's her brother and her husband, excuse me. Artemisia II is said to have had more or less lost her mind. She had the famous mausoleum at Halicarnassus built, a gigantic tomb adorned on all 4 sides with statues commemorating her beloved. It is believed that she mixed some of Mausolus's ashes into her daily drink. She was also talented in the art of deception, and she successfully repelled an invasion attempt despite her enemy's superior numbers. He makes one last note that Ultimecia's castle, besides looking very much sort of like a cathedral with all the stained glass, is full of statues. So there's yet another element of this. So the historical personage, Artemisia, whose husband gave his name to the mausoleum, and for whom she created a giant mausoleum, while potentially taking some of his ash in her morning tea every day. And so awesome. Yeah, this Artemisia is a gnarly antagonist based on some gnarly goddesses / women.
Yeah. And then there's Adel running around, like you said. We will have to find out how that all works, how sorceresses are, able to coexist, if at all.
Yes, and how it is, and what it is she is going to do with Elena's magic, because supposedly you can't change the past, but maybe a sorceress can.
Yeah, right. So Ultimecia can at least project her consciousness back in time. It seems like she's not content with that. She wants to do something further that they're going to call time compression, which I think we'll have to get into a little more next time. But yeah, that idea, I know you were interested in with respect to what's going on with, this being called the final battle, and then it emerges we're maybe halfway through the game, right?
Yeah.
It just made it to disc 3. So yeah, what is up with this idea of time compression, at least at face value? Like, the initial concept of it seems to be something like stopping the flow of forward movement, right? Just like stasis, mausoleum, statue-esque, something like, and yet we see Seifer walk away. So he isn't stuck either, right? It wasn't the final battle. Presumably we'll face him at least once more. And we haven't even really faced our true foe yet, it turns out.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. What is his role in this going to be now that Edea is back to being matron? And even though the game has left open the possibility that she could be possessed again, one gets the sense that her role has been played. Rinoa just got knocked out cold. LNA still on the board, and apparently Adel is too, who we're just now learning this about. This very like a certain sort of detective novel where details there are details strewn about the world, but we've had a heavy dosage of just things told to us. And it's like, and you're actually all orphans from the same place. You knew each other. And actually, this one guy actually remembered you, but didn't say anything the entire time. And so in the same way that I think some
Irving is always just waiting for the right moment, man.
Right, yeah. I think some players dislike the romance. I think some dislike the divergence from the medieval theme. I think some dislike the realistic figures, but I think also some, perhaps rightly, dislike what would seem like a convoluted storyline when the plot of the game is going along at a nice clip, but the solutions we're given to the problems of the narrative are getting more and more complicated. And that's what I find interesting about Final Fantasy VIII. It is a game that is exploding in complexity right now. And in fact, when I gave my paper 2 weeks ago and I explained just a little bit about the nature of the world, that's something that one can basically entirely miss during the course of the game. Like the fact that the world is, the action of the game started 4,000 years ago, basically, and then 100 years ago, and then 17 years ago, and there's a creator god and some sort of odd Promethean and also original sin sort of way managed to turn his body into the magical power that is passed down generation to generation by witches or by sorceresses. And so I think that's sort of an interesting thing that I'd like to consider at some point, which is that ultimately this persecution has a patriarchal origin. And this patriarchal god who split himself in two gave the men the inert skin of his body, that half, but then he gave the women the real power. This is a sort of medieval romance in that these women are then given ultimate agency and power in the world, like Morgan Le Fay, for example. Edea almost takes over the world, and that's actually Ultimecia. And these women are powerful. They are not just passive objects. But also the fact that they have this power that in some ways seems like a curse for some of them. Like Adel seems to have been transformed in some way by magic, and we can talk about that when we get to her. She's a very interesting sort of phenotype, you might say. But also Edea, it sort of messes with the trajectory of her life, and possibly this also happened with Rinoa, and we know that Ultimecia is not very happy about the fact that she knows what her future is and is trying to avoid it. So is this a gift? Is this a curse? Is this original sin? Or is this, like sort of Morgan Le Fay, pure agency? And so the women have it even better than the men insofar as they're sorceresses in the world, the unnamed world of Final Fantasy VIII. That'd be something I'd be interested in talking about. Maybe it doesn't have as simple an answer as I might be suggesting, but you got to ask the question at some level.
That's a good question. No, just the male female quality of power at stake here. Thinking about that in terms of what's going on with the love story trappings of the game. Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting because there's that hierarchical relationship between Ultima, Edea, and Seifer. He's obviously her knight. He is subjected to her. Whereas Squall and Rinoa, she's really worked very hard to get him to allow himself to be subjected by her. Or there's something even the language I shouldn't even use the same word, right? So there's some sort of courtship going on between Rinoa and Squall, and there's an equality to it. Whereas this relationship mired in imaginary in the archetypal, the sorceress and the knight, there's subjection and hierarchy, which is itself a more artificial, or at least a less personal form of connection between people, right? It's real when it's present, but it's not. It's the people who play the roles are fungible to some extent.
In the sorceress's case, they are kind of, and if they're the one who controls the knight, then the knight, much more so, is just interchangeable in some sense.
Right. Whereas Squall wants Rinoa, Rinoa wants to know Squall as a person, not just as a role. Even if they are going to occupy a certain role for each other, it's based on a personal connection. in a way where Seifer and Edea, for all their wanting to control the world, there's just a paleness to it. It's missing the emotional element. They would say the Jungians would say the feeling element, the feeling function of the four functions. The connection to reality, sensations connection to reality, but feeling is like connection to what things are actually worth and what the value of things are. So like if you want to rule the world or destroy the world, sometimes that would seem to come from a lack of valuing that the world is not enough, as it were. That even in owning the world, you would still miss like Midas, the most essential thing in the world, which is the human connection. And so
Seifer seems to throw that in Rinoa's face here at the end, right? Like if you have her in your party, he mentions something about like, oh, even after that time we dot dot dot, right? He's using it just to taunt her and mock her.
Yes, I didn't have her
Yeah,
in.
so
Yeah, he said to Selfie he wished
dialogue is different for each person.
He said he wished he got to know Selfie, and she said too late. And she was like, "You're not my type." Which, well done, Selfie. Well done, Yuffie in Final Fantasy VIII. As it were. Sorry, I was just reading a very good master's thesis on what these characters. These are called. They have a term. It's called something like comfort characters or something like that. Characters that are just made to be pleasant to audiences, and this can of course be like ones that are scantily clad for like young males to watch, or like very funny. But I think Yuffie and Selfie are just like that sort of manic pixie fairy, very like sweet, easy to like, but sort of non-romance character. So it's just sort of a pleasant relationship. Or that's what it's supposed to look like. But I'll have to look that up or put it in the more likely put it in the comments what the correction is.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, I know we're coming up on time now, but so was there anything that we missed? I thought we talked about quite a few good and useful things, or anything listeners should be on the lookout for in the coming weeks.
I mean, yeah, I think there's still more to do with the time compression thing once we get a little more data on that. But no, yeah, for now, that Cerberus fight, that was a doozy. Yeah, that was harder for me than the actual boss battles with the Edea. So,
yeah. He was tough. No,
as usual, the side quest is tougher than the real thing.
These and some of these enemies are getting dangerous and that they just have to be taken seriously, or they can end your playthrough. Well, that said, time to go encounter some more dangerous enemies, and I'm looking forward to getting into Disc 3. And maybe we're farther along than we think. I seem to recall that Disc 4 is mostly just Ultimecia's castle, so we might be closer to 3/4 of the way through than just half. And well, I sort of hope not, but I do want to get through this. The point is to finish at some point, and so all the closer.
Okay.
Well,
great. Sounds good.
Thank you again for your time. See you soon.